Okay, so but my clock is 3:01, so let's go ahead and get started. And good afternoon, Diane. Um, Hello, everybody. My name is Kelly Lippincott, and I work for ProMedica Senior Care. I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping items with you in just a moment. But first, I want to introduce one of our speakers today. Brandon Smeltzer is the Director of Sales and Marketing for the Assisted Living Division of ProMedica Senior Care. Welcome, Brandon. How are you?
Thanks, Kelly. Doing good. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. Happy New Year to all of you. We had a great run of webinars in 2020 and hope to continue that for you here in 2021. Hope everyone is doing well and hopefully has the same optimistic outlook that we have for the coming year. Today's webinar will offer you some insight on what life is like for your loved ones with dementia during the pandemic, as well as how we can create an environment and adapt our care during the pandemic. We really appreciate PK joining us and sharing her experience and expertise with you. She and her team have been great partners of Arden Courts for probably almost 15 years now, primarily through the virtual dementia tour, which hopefully we'll be able to offer again to all of you maybe later this year. It's a great experience, but a hard one to administer during a pandemic where social distancing is required. So stay tuned on that. At Arden Courts, we're continuing to follow our virus protocols, do best practices, just trying to minimize the risks associated with the virus. I'm sure many of you have heard, the vaccine is very hard to come by at this point. The federal government set a goal to have 20 million vaccines distributed by January 1st, and unfortunately only 1 million were administered by that date. So federal and state governments are still trying to prioritize groups, but timelines are the struggle right now as to when. Having said that, we're very happy that Arden Courts and our sisters have remained in the priority group. As of today, most, if not all, of our communities have either had their first vaccine clinic or have scheduled their first vaccine clinic date. So very excited about that. If you are interested in your loved one becoming a resident and being vaccinated, currently our vaccines are being offered to current residents and employees. I encourage you to reach out to your nearest Arden Courts. You can learn more about their vaccine clinic dates. As long as your loved one moves in before the second vaccine clinic date, then that will ensure that they do get vaccinated. So I think, we have a tremendous opportunity in front of us right now to control what the next few months will look like. I think taking the vaccine will have a remarkable impact on our fight against the virus. I'm excited that the vaccine has even been proven to defeat the new mutation of the virus that was first identified in England. So I know leadership in our organization has really tried to encourage all of our resident families as well as our employees to take the vaccine. And I think some perspective for that I've heard, which I want to share with all of you, is if we were offered the opportunity a year ago to take a 95% effective vaccine with no additional risk to us or anyone we love, if we had a 95% chance of preventing deaths and illness, if we had access to the world's most effective and scrutinized vaccine, if we could prevent the stress, loneliness, and concern that we've experienced in the past year, would we take it? I think a year ago, knowing what we've all experienced, we definitely would have done that. I had my first dose 2 weeks ago, hoping to get my second dose later this week. I want this pandemic to end. I've seen how much it's affected our residents, our employees, and the residents' families. I want this to be over, and I think many of my coworkers share the same commitment to keeping our residents, employees safe. So again, if you're considering it, if you'd like your loved one to receive the vaccine, please reach out to us. Each building's a little bit different, so I encourage you to speak to someone there about their clinic dates. During today's webinar, if you have any questions about the information covered from PK or about Arden Courts, Kelly, myself, PK, we're happy to answer any of those for you. So thank you again for attending today's webinar. I'll turn things back over to Kelly.
Thanks. So today's webinar, we have a good number of people who are joining us today. So what we're going to do is we're going to have PK go through the meat of her presentation. If anybody has the urgent questions, go ahead and type them in the chat room, which is the vessel that we'll be using to look at the questions and answers for everybody today. If you have questions about Arden Courts or dementia in general, you have a challenging situation that maybe we can help you with, we will definitely be very available to answer those questions for you after the webinar. And like I said, if you have an urgent question, you could type it in between too. We'll try to get to them as we can. I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker today. Her name is PK Belville, and she is the founder of Second Wind Dreams, an internationally known non-for-profit organization created to change the perception of aging through fulfilling elders' dreams and offering educational programs to help caregivers understand the physical and mental challenges facing those with dementia. She also created the internationally acclaimed virtual dementia tour, which is utilized in a number of our Art and Courts communities. It's been experienced by 3 million people in 20 countries, which is incredible. The virtual dementia tour is a scientifically proven training method designed to build sensitivity and awareness in individuals caring for those with dementia. She's been featured in a number of publications and television shows, including ABC News Primetime and Fox News Network, and even the show The Doctors. She has been featured in publications such as Assisted Living Today, The Washington Post, and even the USA Today. So today, she's going to be sharing her knowledge and information from her years of experience with us. We are so happy to have you here today. Welcome, PK.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity. Families on the line here today, I want you to know that this is our time. This is the time that we as family members are going to be able to examine what we're dealing with as far as our loved ones with dementia and how COVID-19 is affecting them. So besides what Kelly mentioned, and I'm exhausted hearing all of that, let me tell you that I'm also the caregiver for my 93-year-old father who has a vascular dementia, which is a kind of dementia that affects by lesions in the brain. It affects how he views the day in varying levels. So for instance, he can do some things very, very well and some things very, very poorly. That kind of keeps family members off balance because you assume he can do some things and some things, because he can do that, he should be able to do this. And you kind of play that mental game of, well, he could do that yesterday, why can't he do it today? So Dad lives with us. He's a World War II veteran. He is legally blind, and he lost his hearing in one ear because he was a gunner during the war. He has partial hearing in his other ear. So you can see when we talk about dementia, I want to be clear that we're talking about the varying forms of dementia, which brings to the table all kinds of different variables. But also along with dementia comes a great deal of physical problems. And I don't want to ignore that today, but I do want to let you know that we'll be touching on some of that. One of them I'm going to touch on right now, and that is the misconception that people with dementia, because they don't respond like you and I do, are hearing impaired. In fact, that's usually not the case. People with dementia can usually hear okay, they just can't understand the verbiage coming in. So that makes the responses different and a little strange. It's called receptive aphasia. So families, as we go through this short time together, I hope you know that I'm in this with you, shoulder to shoulder. Never ever thought in a million years, even I've been in this career for 40 years, never imagined that my father would be living with us and presenting some of the challenges in my life. And let me also say in my marriage. Having my father there has created a bit of tension, as it would in most marriages, and we have slowly but surely soldiered through that. That's a whole different talk right there, how to navigate those marital waters when a family member moves in. So So the first slide, I wanted to spend just a minute. I know most of you families know some of this, but I always like to start out being clear about what we actually know about dementia. People with dementia can easily sense when something's wrong. Isn't that interesting? And let me tell you how I usually know that. When I used to work and continue to work on the floor in assisted living, nursing homes, hospice, home health, I could tell when I was having a bad day because the people around me were having a bad day. So who was having the bad day? That was me. And I was reflecting my attitude and my feelings without even being conscious of it on the people that I was caring for. You can also see this with some family members. Some family members can care for their loved ones really, really well, and other members of the same family have a really difficult time getting mama or daddy or aunt or uncle to do the things that are necessary in daily care. We also know this is a physiological issue born of some brain issues. We also know that people living with dementia have lost their peripheral vision. You know, that doesn't sound like that's all that important, but as we're going to learn today, it's super important. You know, you try to approach a person with dementia from the left or the right, they're not going to know it's you, it's them you're talking to. And as you approach, you might get louder and louder. And when you touch them, they're going to explode. Or try approaching a person with dementia from the left or the right with a tray of food, and all of a sudden, poof, this food shows up in front of them. They don't know what to do with it. It doesn't make any sense. So that peripheral vision is compromised. So let's put that on the burner there too. Loss of executive functioning occurs. That sounds a little bit complicated, and it sounds like something somebody in an office building would need to be dealing with. But the truth of the matter is, executive functioning is that high-level mental processing that you and I can do relatively well. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to picture the meanest person you have ever dealt with in your whole life in your head. Got it? Well, I can tell you your body started tensing, your face may have grimaced, you had all kinds of emotions that went with that. Your brain had to filter through a number of different people because you probably had more than one mean person in your head, but I asked you to pick the most. So you had to come up with that person. What I'm telling you is your brain had to go through a whole lot of different things in order to get to that nasty person you know. That's executive functioning. The fact you could take my verbiage, assimilate it into your brain, filter through the people, come up with someone, and then mentally picture that person. It's a high-level mental process. People living with dementia really can't do that. So we'll talk about other things that they can do. Short-term memory is impaired. Well, I think there's not a family member on this call that doesn't know that the short-term memory is impaired. And we know this because we find ourselves having to repeat the same things over and over again, or doing the same things over and over again with our loved ones. That is part of what happens in the brain. The part of the brain that handles short-term memory information becomes damaged. So it's sort of like information in, information out, information in, information out. It doesn't stick around. And in fact, for you and I, for us to move something from short-term memory to long-term memory takes a whole bunch of different gymnastics in our brain as well. And people with dementia aren't able to do those gymnastics. Control's the central issue with dementia. You know, after all these 40 years of working in this field, it took a while for me to realize what is the reason for so many of the behaviors that we see in a loved one with dementia. Most of the behaviors, besides the ones that are a function of the brain going through its problems, is due to feeling out of control. You know, you and I are in control. we're here. We figured out Zoom, for the love of Pete. We're able to get through the day. Most of us, if you haven't already, started thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. We can get in our cars. We can go places, not as much now, but obviously we got to command and control. If I told you today that you were going to be in a nursing home or an assisted living, and you can't drive and you can't do most of the things you used to do, you might act out that loss of control. And at home, when you think about it, they can't sometimes remember what clothes to wear, so they wear the same thing every single solitary day. That's their attempt to control the environment. They attempt to control the environment by following you everywhere, shadowing. They feel like you've got good sense, so they're trying to follow you everywhere. Well, that's their way to gain control. Follow the person that looks smart. Sometimes shadowing doesn't feel like you're very smart. It's aggravating at times. Dad follows me just about everywhere until I can answer whatever it is his concern is. And when you think about it, that's kind of a compliment to me, because he thinks I know what I'm doing, flawed logic as that is. So control is central. And if I can tell you one thing to pay attention to every day when you're caring for your loved one, it's how can I spend my day giving control back to this person I love? Now that takes a little bit of thinking, right? I have two shirts here. Which one do you want to wear? This one or this one? Let's go for a walk. Which way do you want to go? This way or this way? Do you want me to start with the beans, the potatoes, or the meat? Constantly giving them control, helping them feel that control. Not only does it help them feel in control, but it makes them realize that you're building a relationship with them in spite of the losses. Again, I can do a whole talk on that, but just try to cook that through and spend some time thinking about ways that you can give control back in light of the losses. There's a loss of focus, and attention is exhibited. So that's a poorly written line I have there. What I'm trying to say is sometimes they can't sit through a meal. They can't keep a mask on very long. They have trouble attending to any kind of activity very long. That is part of the brain problem. The brain can't focus well on one thing at a time. There are going to be intervening variables that happen in the brain that takes their focus off of one thing or another. So here's an example. If you are trying to have a meal with a person with dementia that has this focus and attention difficulty, if the dishwasher goes into another cycle, they're going to hear that and start to get up. If a door slams, they're going to hear that and want to know where that came from. The brain's ability to filter out relevant versus irrelevant stimuli is very damaged. So that contributes to the loss of focus and attention. If we have time today, I would like to get back to that. It has to do with the reticular activating system and the amygdala. And families, really, you got to understand that this is as aggravating as it can be, that this loss of focus and attention is happening. There is a real biological reason that it's occurring. Difficulty discriminating sounds. You know, you and I, if we hear a clock ticking, we automatically, yeah, there's a clock ticking, and we don't even sometimes catalog it. If we hear footsteps running down the hall, we catalog that. Must be my kid. They have difficulty discriminating where sounds are coming from and what the sounds are. So they will respond in sometimes different ways to sounds than you and I do. I have a good example of that. I was doing a psych eval on a gentleman who I would say he was in his early stages of dementia. And at that point, I wasn't even sure what type, but he was in the early stages. And I could not get him to attend for love nor money. And finally, you know, sometimes families, you got to sit back, you got to watch your loved one for a little while and really get a beat on what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing. That's essential time that you spend, families. So I sat back with this guy and I paid attention. And you know what it was? Every time the air conditioning clicked on, he stopped. Couldn't get him back. And that's the other part of that focus and attention and discriminating sounds. Once that focus is lost, sometimes you just have to stop, regroup, and try it again instead of trying to force them in the moment back to what they were doing. That's a diversion tactic, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Now, this is interesting too. You know, psychologically, we've all got our coping strategies established, right? When something happens, we have our go-to coping strategy. So if something great happens, we get excited, we get motivated, we get a lot of movement around it. Other people, same thing happens, and you might get a smile and and then they move on. So different people have different coping strategies based on their personality dynamics, which obviously are established at a much younger age. So people with dementia are no different. So when COVID-19 hit, and when they were finding themselves in their rooms, pretty much isolated and secluded, or you were having to quarantine them, wear masks, do a whole lot of cleaning, try to keep them safe, not taking them out much. When all of that hit, their personality, they knew something was going on. Remember the first bullet? They could sense something was going on, whether or not they could understand what you were saying, and God forbid turn on the news in front of a person with dementia. Even if they ask for it, I find something else for them to watch. But if when they were younger, they were the type of person, when something happened in the family or in their career, if they got withdrawn, depressed, they're going to do that again. If they ignored it and moved on and got another thing to do, they're going to do that. So you see what I'm saying? Families, you know what your mom or dad or aunt or uncle used to how they used to handle things when they were younger. Obviously you were younger too, but go back to some of those thoughts and you're going to find that those same coping strategies are going to happen again. So it's kind of good news because you can be a little bit prepared. Now be aware, depression in geriatrics is obviously a real thing. And when it comes to dementia, of course, I spend a lot of time doing differential diagnosis between depression and dementia and delirium. Also, depression and dementia, just the two of them. But here's an interesting note. Depression and dementia can be have a dual diagnosis in the earlier stages. But when we get into the middle stages and the later stages, the depression seems to fall away a bit. So what I'm saying is, make sure that if you see in their earlier stages a lot of withdrawal, a lot of not doing what they used to do, not just in light of the cognitive decline, but because they're emotionally not doing those things, please, please, please have them checked out, because there are things that we can do as far as medication is concerned that can help with depression. And of course, we want that, because when you get in the cycle of depression and dementia and depression and dementia, the dementia, the dementia, the dementia, you see, we want to keep them up here as long as we possibly can. So if their coping strategy in the past was that they got severely depressed and withdrawn, you can expect that again. Coping strategies usually follow you all the way through your life. And facial recognition is difficult. That's called visual agnosia. So families, this is a tough one right here. It's hard when they don't recognize us. It's hard when they don't recognize other family members. But let's look at a couple of things here. Of course, this is also because of some things happening in the brain that are causing the inability to recognize a visual stimuli that they used to be able to recognize, interpret it in the brain, and come up with who that is. So you see, that's almost in the executive functioning category. So what I want you to think about is when they can't recognize you, what's frequently happening is they don't recognize who you are now. They would probably recognize a picture of you when you were younger. And sometimes what happens is they think you're their spouse, especially children who look a lot like the spouse that's no longer with us. They'll sometimes substitute that. That is not as much agnosia as when they really can't recognize facial, the people around them. So let's think about this. This happens pretty frequently, actually. So what happens is we have older adults that won't go into the bathroom anymore. And at first, we can't figure out why. So what we have learned is they're passing the mirror and they're seeing themselves in the mirror. They don't recognize themselves, so they think somebody's in there and they back out, and now they're urinating and defecating in inappropriate places, or appropriate to them because they can't get in the bathroom. We drape the mirrors until that part of their dementia passes. So facial recognition can sometimes be difficult for the family and for the person with dementia. So when you look at the picture on this slide, I firmly believe that this is exactly what's going on. There's a lot of things happening on the surface with a person with dementia, but underneath all of that is the real person. They're still there. They're still paying attention as much as they can. They can still feel love. They can still feel support. And they know the difference in those who genuinely care about them and are into making a relationship and continuing a relationship, and those who aren't. And that's pretty heavy stuff, families. So now let's take a minute and let's look at the strengths of a person with dementia. You know, I just spent an inordinate amount of time talking about the weaknesses, but let's get to the strengths here. Now this is a picture, these two are pictures in my dad's place in our house. He calls it Valhalla. I thought that was a really cool name until I looked it up and realized that Valhalla means place where heroes go to die. I said, Dad, we gotta come up with something else, but we haven't. So this is Valhalla. What I want you to notice is things are very visual everywhere. Everything is visual. Even to the point where it is a little aggravating to me because he leaves his clothes out on the floor. If I try to pick them up and put them away, he gets very agitated. He wants to be able to see them. Same thing with shoes. They're lined up everywhere. It's a fall hazard, and I do the best I can to try to keep it to the side, but it just aggravates the fire out of him. You can see that his, on the left, you can see that all of his toiletries are out. They're not in a container or in a drawer. That way he can see it, he's cued to it, and he knows what he's to do with those things. Dad's still at the place where we can have a little bit of a schedule with him because he's legally blind. We have to do it verbally as well, but we have Monday, Tuesday, we have every day of the week there and his chore for the day. Now, he likes having something to do. A lot of people really do, with dementia, really do like feeling useful and doing something. And when you see over there, it's things like water the plants, take the dogs out. Now that's not walking them because that would be too dangerous for him, but it's letting them out and walk with them in the yard and things like that. It makes him feel really good about himself. And when he has a lapse where he's not feeling well, we just recoup and try it again another day. So here's a great thing about people with dementia. They have a great long-term memory. And see, that sometimes makes families nuts, doesn't it? Because they can remember things from 1945 and they can't tell you what you just asked them to do. So, but it's a good thing, long-term memory. So lots of memory books, lots of scrapbooks, lots of old pictures, lots of talks about favorite vacations. When I'm assisting Dad with his baths, we talk about our favorite vacations. So families drill into that long-term memory stuff. They really can go off on that, and that's a wonderful thing. Well, let's call them resourceful sometimes. Okay, let's just call it resourceful. They hide problems. They're not going to tell you when they're having a difficult time. You're going to have to be good detectives. I think that's what, rather than caregivers, I think we should be called detectives, because we have to look at everything around a person with dementia, and we've got to figure out what is going on. Hiding things is like a form of hoarding. They will find places to put things that will never occur to any of us on this call, not one of us. They can hide dentures, they can hide hearing aids. They're very resourceful. Glasses, there's so many hidden things in our house that I think will probably be hitting a heyday someday. There has got to be, people, there's got to be a bucket of hearing aids somewhere in our house, somewhere. And they're resourceful with that. I mean, who can think of some of these places? It's amazing. Families, if you got to make a decision about stuff you need to do during the day with a loved one with dementia, do it in the morning. The mornings are the best for them. They wake up early sometimes. They are good to go. They are paying attention a little bit. If you've got to do a doctor's appointment on telehealth, telemedicine during COVID, make sure you do that in the morning. Don't do things in the afternoon. They tire very easily. Some people call it sundowners in the afternoon. I just call it exhaustion. Can you imagine how hard it is for a person living with dementia to get through the day? I mean, think about it. All day it's a challenge. So by mid-afternoon, early evening, they're on their raw nerve. Back years ago, I was really stupid, or more stupid, in that I felt like in the afternoons, in order to put off sundowners or this tiredness, I would have big activities for them to do to kind of get their mind off of all of that. Well, that made it worse. It should have been nap time, should have been a time to relax, lights lower, soft music, not a lot of interaction going on. But the mornings, if you got to get things done, bath time, anything, that should be your best time for that. People with dementia respond well to calm settings. Calm. Kids running through the house, lots of doors slamming, phones ringing, any of those things, remember we talked about their inability to focus and attend. That is a good example of what can make things very difficult for them. So keep things calm. Take a look at your surroundings. Take a good, healthy look and make sure that things are pretty calm. It'll make a huge difference. Schedules are comforting, as I showed you with Dad scheduling. At certain stages, some stages the schedules won't mean too terribly much, but mid-stage and late, early stage are good times for schedules. And as I showed you with Dad's stuff, they do better when things are visually accessible. One of the reasons that Dad moved in with us was because he decided every day that he needed to put out what he was going to have for dinner on the counter when he got up in the morning. Of course, that was spoiled. He was getting sick by the time he ate it. So, but he had to have it visual. It had to be right there. So let's get to communication. So when we communicate with a person that has dementia, we got to realize that 2/3 of communication is nonverbal. So what you don't say is more important than what you do say. So we're going to run through this kind of quick. So keep in mind, when you look at these faces, you can tell what her mood is, right? Well, people with dementia, believe it or not, can tell. They can tell. Like I talked about the good days and the bad days, when you're having one, they're having one, it's written all over our faces. We have to be very good at hiding whatever might be bothering us and showing a good, positive, nonverbal deportment. So our tone of voice is important. You know, some people don't realize that they've got a really nasty tone of voice. So help people keep it lower octave, try to keep it softer if you can, depending on the hearing impairment, but it's the tone of voice. They can tell when you're aggravated, and that's going to make them aggravated, and that's going to escalate things. So you're the one who is providing the care, so your tone of voice is important. How you come across with your body language, jerking, pulling, forcing, those kinds of things are picked up, which increases the agitation for your loved one. Touch, super important. People with dementia, even those who never used to like to be touched, love to have their arms stroked, their hair brushed. A lot of touching for a person with dementia takes on a different meaning than it did when they were younger. So try more touch. Now, families, I think we all know that we've got a role reversal here, right? It was Mom and Dad that used to be touching us. They used to be holding us, used to be telling us that we were magnificent and fantastic and the best thing since sliced bread. Well, now it's time for us to do the same thing. And it's a little uncomfortable for us because that's not been the way that we've been wired. So spend a little bit of quality time thinking about how you can provide more touch to your loved one. Greeting, what I mean by that is whenever you start something new with your loved one, make sure that you say their name first. Greet them. Hey, Dad, now we're gonna greet them. Why? Because remember the focus and attention thing? We want to be sure that we're greeting them to get their focus and attention using their name, whatever name it is that you use in your family. Maintaining eye contact. Did you know that when you maintain eye contact with other people, it gives them a sense of trust? People who can maintain eye contact are trustworthy people, and they give that impression. So pay attention to that eye contact with your loved one, because it makes a whole lot of difference. Even if your loved one is looking down or looking away, getting that eye contact going is huge. It's huge. And watch your visual and verbal cues. While I wanted to go more with body language here, you know, I usually couple visual with verbal cues by saying, here's a drink, I'd like for you to drink all of this as I point. Verbal and visual cue. Instead of, I need for you to go get something to drink. See, that's an executive functioning thing. And we're going to get upset when that doesn't happen. So, PWD is person with dementia, people with dementia, whatever. You could say I got lazy on this slide too, if you wanted to. So in this pandemic, we have you noticed a lot of news feeds and stuff are talking about how we can talk to children and things during this pandemic? But do you ever hear anything about how we should be carrying on the conversations with our older adults, especially those with dementia? So here we go. And you know what? I bet you a lot of you family members on the call have some even better ideas than this. So please, please do feel free to share those in the chat box, and we can share those with everybody. So if they ask what's going on, and some will and some won't, those that won't are still sensing that something's wrong, as we talked about earlier. But for those who do ask, keep your response short. I know it's hard because a lot's going on and will continue to go on, but try to keep your response short. For instance, if they're asking why you're wearing a mask or protective equipment or whatever, or why the people out there are wearing masks and protective equipment, keep it short and just say, you know what, there's a virus like the flu going around, and so everybody's just trying to keep safe. That's pretty simple. You don't want to get into the coronavirus has killed 400,000 people. You don't want to get into too much detail. Just it's a virus like the flu, and we're trying to be extra careful. At the same time, touch them and give them a kind word, and everything's fine. Everything's going to be fine. We just have to be careful. What we don't want is to give enough information to where they can misinterpret it and have fear for their own life. We want them to feel safe. You are safe. You are a family member. You have control over your environment. You know what's going on. They are vulnerable. They can be fearful, and all of this doesn't make sense. So you have to go the extra mile to protect them from some of this information that's out there and help them feel safe. You're safe. I'm watching out for you. I told Dad just this morning, Dad, I'm never going to put you in a dangerous situation. I'm just not. Everything is fine. Now, I kind of said that in a condescending way just then, and I don't like me right now, so let me say that again. Dad, you're safe, and everything's going to be fine. Big difference there. So watch how you do it. Be prepared for repetition. Why are those people wearing that over their face? What's wrong with their face? What happened? So be prepared with that repetition. Remember, that's part of the brain issue, that short-term memory. We talked about how that works. So repetition is the key. Just get used to that, right? Be calm. Take deep breaths. Yeah, Dad, we're safe. We're safe, and everything's going to be fine. Keep the calm. Keep the upbeat. Use distraction. Sometimes when people with dementia get upset about anything, like one of you coming home with a mask on and it doesn't make sense to them, and they worry and they get all spun into worry about what's really going on. They don't say anything, but you can tell they're not wanting to eat, they're not wanting to. Use distraction as much as possible and try to protect them from anything that they see. So when that mask comes in and you know that that's a trigger for them, that's upsetting for them, have that mask ripped off right away and say, it's all good. I'm just being safe because of the virus, like the flu. Tick the light, move on to something else. And what works for me in most situations and has for 40 years is when I can tell, and you can tell, and some people will say that they can't, but I know you can tell when your loved one's about to blow a gasket. You know when it's coming, you can see it start to happen. They start more pacing, their eyes get more furrowed, their responses are short and ticked. That's the time where you just back off for a little bit, divert. I got some hymns I want to play over here. It's on my Pandora. Come sit down. Come sit down and have a listen to it. You remember this song? Remember when this was played? Do you see? You can see it coming. You can see it coming. My dad actually was getting all worked up into something, and he picked up a barbell and threatened my husband with it. Now, we could have gotten upset. We could have gone all hissy-fitty over it. We realized he was very upset, and it was over the television. He couldn't seem to make it work. Let's face it, with all these new channels and stuff like that, I'm not sure I've figured it out yet. And I'm just on the north side of 60, so I don't get it either. But he was getting very agitated, and he's a strong man, and he picked up that barbell and threatened John. So what do you do in a situation like that? Do you grab the barbell and say, sit down and stop? No, you back off. You let him regroup. He'll eventually put it down. It's heavy. And when he does, that's when you reapproach and you say, I got these hymns here, or whatever works in your family. You know what's going to work. And you pull that out. So, and then always solicit their help. When I'm putting a mask on an older adult, I usually say, I need your help with this. It's hard for me to figure out how to get, yeah, I know. So let's just do it right here. Excellent. You are so helpful. That's great. Always solicit help. Okay. So I'm going to show you this little video right here real quick. And what I want you to do is take a quick look, and when you do, I'd like for you to think about what could be done differently. Okay. I wish we were in a convention hall like we used to be so that I could ask you questions about that. I'm going to play it one more time, and I want you to notice everything. Remember, we've talked about a whole lot of different things, so take a quick gander one more time. Now, I don't know about you, but a lot of things could have been avoided in that situation, right? We talked about some of the things that could be done differently to help people with dementia. So I hope you realize that she was approaching from the side, and that's the wrong thing to do, right? She has on a mask. She's hard to understand. I could hardly understand what she was saying. The patient doesn't know she's coming up to her, has no idea what's going on. Now, and then did you notice the body language on the caregiver? She looked ticked from the beginning. I mean, even though the patient's not even looking at her, that attitude's coming through pretty loud and clear. And then did you notice afterwards how she acted ticked? She threw her hands down against her thighs and then stepped back and looked at the patient like thinking all kinds of bad things. Now, I'm going to go to the next slide, and I'd like for you to take a look at the difference. Oh, wait, we're seeing it again. Here we go. Okay. Okay, let's look at that one more time, and I want you to think about all the stuff we talked about and what is so different here. Oops, we don't need to see it again. Okay. Okay, so how about that? What a difference. We shifted the room so that the family member can actually face the loved one. And you've got to do that all the time. You got to fix it so that everywhere you have your loved one positioned, you are in the major line of sight. You're not coming across from side to side. You're right in front of them. So there she comes. She used her name. Good morning, Penny. She greeted her, which we talked about, right? As she approached, she began to use her body language to gesture what it is she's about to do. She's got Penny's attention, she's got her eye contact, and she moves in. Did you see what a difference that made? Because she was actually getting her loved one to do what she wanted her to do, which was to stand up. She was demonstrating, she was getting under her arms, and she was helping her stand up. Also, no, families, you don't ever pull them up, right? You go underneath and you help them, assist them up. And that's just body mechanics to keep in mind. Oops. Okay, so also, did you notice she had on a different kind of mask? It's called a window mask. We call it a dementia mask, so that you can actually see your mouth and you can see what's being said. What I'd like for you to do when you're talking through a mask is to enunciate. Talk like you are a 911 operator and you're trying to get a point across to someone on the other end of the line who's in the middle of a trauma. So the window masks, we have them here at our office and be on the person's level. I'm going to skip this slide.
Hey, PK, someone had asked in the chat room where they could purchase those types of masks. Do you know?
Yes, we have them at Second Wind. Just go to our website, secondwind.org, and we have window masks available there. And they're $5 a piece, and any extra of the proceeds go back to our nonprofit. So yeah, thanks. I use them all the time. It makes a huge difference. Now, one thing to keep in mind with the window masks, to keep them from fogging, I take hand sanitizer and I wipe it on the inside of the mask, and that keeps it from fogging up. But it does make a huge difference. So thank you for that question. So let's go to a little bit, we're running out of time here, and I'm going to make this real quick, but there's a thing to consider. After everything that we've talked about, keep in mind that it's hard for them to see. It's hard for them to understand. It's hard for them to make the leap to a picture on a screen. They have trouble recognizing faces. We have to keep in mind that if this is done, if a video chat or telehealth is happening at the end of the day, it's going to be even harder. You don't want any noise in the background. You want it just as focused as possible. You got to make sure that you've got great accessibility as far as the lines are concerned. This telehealth and video chat stuff for our people with dementia is really a very difficult thing. So for telehealth, here's what I do before any visit, and just try it. I go ahead and weigh Dad. I take his temperature. I make sure we're in a quiet place, the connection. And even though Dad has trouble understanding the visual of the doctor on the screen, I still coach him along. Out of all of this, I want to be sure, families, that you realize that, remember, this is your loved one's doctor's appointment, not yours. Try to stay as far removed as possible. Let your loved one do as much talking as possible. Let the doctor ask questions. I coach doctors though, because so many doctors say things like, so how have you been feeling? A person with dementia is going to say fine. So you're going to have to do a little bit of coaching throughout this. But again, don't fall into the pit of doing all the talking. Okay, I'm almost out of time here. Actually, I am out of time. So I'd be happy to stop here if Kelly, if you prefer.
Yeah, we have a number of questions in the chat room. So why don't we go ahead and start answering some of the questions. How do you know the difference between hearing loss and attention deficit?
Oh, that's a great question. Attention deficit, you're going to see, well, let's call it, okay, attention deficit. Let's go with what they have. A hearing impairment is when, obviously, I usually take them to the doctor and find that out. But attention deficit is when the brain is having trouble following information that's coming in. And you can usually tell that if you give instructions or have a conversation with them about something and you say these words. So what are we going to do next? And if the response is way off the wall, or I don't know, or that's receptive. They aren't able to attend to all that information. And of course, hearing impairment is, they just can't hear it at all. You can do that, and there's very little movement. They crank up the TV really loud so that they can hear. You can see also with both of those situations, the saddest part is when we don't continue to try to engage them, you can see them withdraw more and more and more.
Okay. This question, I guess, is for Brandon. I know that PK had showed the window mask. Someone had asked if we were going to be using window masks at our Arden Courts communities.
I don't think so. So our company policy right now is to use, if we don't have an exposure to the virus, then it's okay if our staff wears procedural masks. If we do have an exposure to the virus, then it depends on a whole lot of things, but that's when we start using N95s and other PPE. I was kind of looking online after that question was asked if there are procedural mask equivalents with a window in them, and I'm not seeing any right now. I think it's a great idea. It's something we would look into, but our company is not right now approving our employees to wear anything other than procedural masks, just to try to minimize the risks of the virus. But great idea, and that's something we'll definitely look into.
That's great. That's great to hear. Yeah.
TK, someone asked, my mom is having days and nights mixed up. Her sleep-wake cycle is not correct. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, so what's happening there, loved one, is that the diurnal rhythms in her brain that handle sleep and wake are messed up. It's actually a brain problem. So there are medications, of course, that can be used. I try to stay away from that kind of thing. We used to do a really horrible thing where we would force them to stay awake all day so that they would sleep better at night. And that's almost inhumane. Her cycles are messed up. If you can start doing the hour-to-hour thing, in other words, you rob 1 hour during the day and add 1 hour to the night, and slowly but surely try to adjust her diurnals. It takes a little bit of time and effort, but that's really the only way you're going to get her out of sync. The way that we know how important the diurnals are is, when we change the time in the fall and the spring, how messed up we are for a couple of days. Well, that's a diurnal problem. And you can imagine in her brain, what's happening is it's gotten reversed. So do the hour by hour exchange, and eventually you're going to be able to get her closer and closer to a normal. Now, also let me mention this. It is essential that since she is up at night, and doing night wandering and you have got to get some sleep, you've got to ensure that that house is safe. She needs to have on a wander guard. You need to have great locks on the house up high so that she can't reach them. Also, there are ways that you can have each one of those alarmed so that if in fact she does figure out how to open one of those, your cell phone is going to go off to tell you that one of them has been breached and you can get up and take care of it. So, you know, put the kinder guards on the doors of the cabinets and do all of those safety measures. Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah. This message, I think, is for both of you. Do you have any particular advice for those of us who have loved ones in facilities and can do only window visits?
Go ahead, PK.
Yeah, in the mornings, number one, that's when you want to do it. Take visual pictures, like pictures of the family itself. Hold them up to the window. Also, you don't want to be yelling through the window particularly, but you can sing loud through the windows. So sing some of your favorite songs with them through the window. And, you know, some people are just pulling up a chair and sitting down there and passing the time. And that ends up being a nice, sort of a calm interaction. But you got to have a lot of time to be able to do that.
Yeah, we're some of our buildings, again, a lot of things are just dependent, building specific, but some of them are trying to work on indoor visits that are socially distanced, especially with the colder weather in a lot of our communities right now. In some of our southern communities, they're still trying, the weather is still in their favor to do some outdoor visits and things like that. So again, I think, I hate to keep kind of saying this, but contact each community to kind of find out what their policies are right now, because it is different depending on their exposure to the virus, if there is one, and then also just the weather and the climate. But great ideas from people. Thanks.
Yep. Another woman says, I hope this question is okay, but how do you get over the guilt as a caregiver to have to place a loved one?
Do you want to take that or do you want me to?
Go ahead, PK.
Yeah, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't. I would love to tell you that you do. There's just you know how when we dropped our kids off at school that first time and you just sit in the car and you kind of, oh man, that was hard. It's a tough one. People are going to tell you that it's no reflection on your ability to care for your loved one. People are going to tell you that no matter what, you're doing the right thing. It doesn't feel right. It will eventually. Once you see how great the care is, wherever you put your loved one, as long as that's the case, you're going to feel more comfortable and less guilty. But there's always something in the back of your mind that that tells you that it's that evil gremlin in there that tells you that things could have been better had you done something differently. So try to keep that gremlin at bay as best you can, but acknowledge that gremlin and tell it, you know, I've done the right thing. I've done everything that I could, and I know that in my heart of hearts. And one other thing about guilt, psychologically, and I don't mean this meanly, because I'm a family member and I've been there too, because we placed Dad in an assisted living first. Guilt is something no one can make you have. Guilt is something that you do to yourself. So in other words, you're beating yourself up on your own for no real reason. So guilt, you're doing to yourself. So be kinder to you. Be kinder with your decisions. If you have people who support you around you, let them tell you over and over how amazing you are. Right now during the pandemic, it's hard to find those people, but they're out there. And let me tell you, on behalf of your loved one, I'm sure you've done the right thing.
Well said, PK. Thanks. Yeah. So Kelly, this presentation itself will be housed on our website, and you can also look at some of our previous seminars. And if my memory is correct, Kelly, I think one or two of our previous sessions actually kind of focused on guilt. So I encourage whoever asked that question, kind of look through the resource library that we have available to you. And just like PK said, it's hard finding people that can support you right now. Those people are at Arden Courts. Just as much as we've cared for residents over the past 25 years, equally we're there for their families as well. It's a journey that we all take together. It takes a village, and it's really important that the families, the caregivers, everybody is working together to support one another. So don't be afraid to reach out to them, but there are resources out there, and I think that's an important thing.
Yeah.
Ask for help. If you're having guilt, I think PK said it well, no one's putting that on you, but someone else might be able to help relieve it from you.
Right. A number of our Arden Courts communities are hosting virtual dementia support groups. I mean, there's nothing better that we would love to do to get together in person, but for the meantime, we are holding support groups virtually, and those are great resources for caregivers, because sometimes there's nothing more comforting than meeting people who might be going through the same challenges as yourself. And so a lot of great information is shared in these. Contact the Arden Courts location nearest you, and you can find out information about these Zoom events, which are free for anybody. Just wanted to add that in there. Let's see, there's another question. What are some things that you could look for when your loved one's behaviors are changing? Are there like core things that sometimes happen that are like, uh-oh, we might be, experiencing challenging behaviors ahead?
That's a tough one. I think you're trying to predict the future almost. I think from an Arden Courts perspective, curious to get kind of PK's thoughts on this too, based on her experience. I mean, we can tell a lot based on age, when someone was diagnosed, how they're progressing through the stages. There's a lot of characteristics, I think, that are common among persons with dementia, but everybody's impacted by it differently. So we can give our best guess, but I've always kind of learned and come to my own kind of conclusion. Behaviors are a result of something, whether an environment stimulus, an individual, behaviors don't generally just occur. Some do, depending on the dementia that the individual is suffering from, the diagnosis, but a lot of behaviors are a result of the environment. They trigger things. So is a particular thing going to happen? There's a high percentage based on our experience, but it's never guaranteed that your loved one will have the same experience as someone else. I don't know, PK, if you have anything to add to that.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, really. We have to keep in mind that for people with dementia, as the brain begins to experience its changes, which are happening, there will be changes occurring, and predicting that is very hard. It usually follows a certain path, but we can't guarantee that. I will say, families, if you could please focus on hydration, 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 hydration. People with dementia forget to drink a lot, and granted, that means you're going to have to toilet them more. But the longer you can avoid a urinary tract infection or an upper respiratory infection, the longer you're going to stave off some of the spiral that can happen from confusion. Those two things are things that I see that will result in a pretty quick decline. So hydration.
There's a really interesting question. Do you think COVID has brought on dementia in people who might have been on the fine line, all the isolation?
I think that's an excellent question, and yes, I do. Yes, I do. In fact, I read a story, an article out of the Journal of American Medical Association that said that, of course, they track the number of deaths associated with different causes over months, periods of time. And since the pandemic hit, there have been over 200 more deaths as the cause of dementia per month than in previous equal months before. So what that tells us is that COVID has brought on this isolation, which has impacted cognitive ability, which has resulted in a severe decline, possibly, well, resulting in death, because that's the diagnosis on death. So my answer to that is yes.
Yeah, it's interesting, PK, just kind of the way that you said that. I mean, for years we've kind of said, I think trying to help families understand that dementia is, it's a disease. It's like congestive heart failure, diabetes, etc. And more often than not, we use the parallel with a cancer, for example. And if your loved one has a cancer, would you seek treatment for them? Likewise, you're calling us because your loved one has dementia. It's important to seek treatment. Now, treatment, we can try to change the definition a little bit compared to some other diseases, but I think to your point, PK, so many things, if not everything, has been impacted by the virus. Did someone get dementia because of the virus? No. But did their dementia become more visible? Did it progress quicker because of the virus? I'd say there's a good chance of that. I think even if they didn't get the virus, just the stress, the anxiety, the mental strain that all of us have been under for the past 10 months has, I use the analogy, think of your brain as a muscle. Our brains are tired. We're tired of being stressed. And if your brain is already starting to deteriorate from some form of dementia and you add more stress to it, it's going to pronounce those effects. So that's why, again, we've said on these webinars, trying to encourage families, totally understand and respect their positions of, I want to wait until the virus is over. The disease dementia is not going to wait. It's going to continue to progress. And is Arden Courts going to prevent that progression? No. We've always said we try to slow the progression through Arden Courts. That's what our environment, our caregiving, our caregivers try to do, is just slow the progression.
Beautiful.
Yeah. When your loved one says, I want to go home, what do you tell them?
Doesn't that just break your heart?
Yeah.
It just breaks your heart when that happens. And it makes you feel, the previous question about the guilt, it makes you feel guilty. But here's what I've learned. They're actually asking for a time and place that you cannot replicate. They're asking for what home was like when they were in control, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, or whatever the decades that apply are. And you can't do that. So as a loved one, when they say that kind of thing, remember in your mind, I really can't do what you're asking me to do. So in response to that, it should be what we talked about earlier: diversion, find something else to talk about, help them feel safe where they are, which I would, if it were me, I was the family member, I would call Arden Courts and I would say, you know what, she's begging to go home, and that's telling me she's stressed out and she needs, they'll respond, they'll make sure that that's addressed, because that's what that is. They want their old life back.
I think usually following that up with a question, I want to go home. Oh my goodness, what's waiting for you at home? What's some of your favorite memories of being at home? I agree with PK. It's home, as we hear it, is generally a location, a destination. I think a lot of times in a person with dementia, when they say home, they're actually looking for a feeling. And trying to get them to reminisce and bring back those warm feelings again. And I think to PK's point, you say, what's one of your favorite memories of home? Celebrating Christmas there was great. Oh, what's your favorite Christmas gift that you've ever received? And you just kind of take that and start going away from the topic of home and try to get them focused on something else. It's something our caregivers try often. It's successful, and it's really
Very
about just kind of
successful.
stepping
Yeah,
in.
that's very successful. Yeah, perfect. Mhm.
Okay.
Same thing applies with wandering too. When they start to wander a lot, they may be looking for something or wanting to do something, and having that conversation with them. Did you ever go hiking when you were younger, or where did you like to go walking, and things like that. That diversion is so effective.
Okay. My mother has vascular dementia. Is there anything preventative I can do for myself?
I don't understand anything preventative I can do for myself.
I'm not sure whether she's talking about caregiver burnout or whether she's thinking that vascular dementia might be genetic and may be preventative for her.
I see. Well, as we know, the genetic components for dementia itself are low. The studies are showing that the percentage of people who get dementia from a hereditary standpoint is lower the older the diagnosis is made. So in other words, if your loved one was diagnosed at 70 or 80, anything over about 65, your chances of having a hereditary component are lower than if it's diagnosed in their 40s and 50s. There's just it's a different type of dementia. Vascular dementia is so often associated with high blood pressure and with heart disease. So you better be checking to be sure that, let your doctor know, because probably being on some vasodilators so that you wouldn't throw a lesion, and, keeping your blood pressure under control. If that was the impetus of your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think we come across that often too. It's, what is there anything I can do to prevent? And, not the answer to that is no. And we don't know the cause in the first place, but a brain healthy diet is generally a heart healthy diet. And, I think with regard to some of the vascular dementia and other things that are not just about the brain, right? The vascular dementia has something to do with your vascular system. So, if you're looking to try to prevent yourself from getting vascular dementia, try to eat healthy, exercise. I mean, it's really just about trying to lead a healthy lifestyle. But will that prevent you from getting dementia? Not necessarily. There's genetic tests and things like that. But I think the concern that goes along with those is you take a genetic test that says you have a 60% chance of getting dementia someday, but you also have a 40% chance of never getting it. So do you want that worry and stress on your mind of, I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah. Also, alcohol abuse. Alcohol abuse is associated with vascular dementia. And I know that is part of my father's history, alcohol abuse. So, and continues to be. That is a struggle. I don't know if any of you loved ones on the phone right now are dealing with family members who are hiding the alcohol and drinking a good bit. I know I deal with it with my dad, so that's another topic for discussion, but it adds a whole different level of care.
Okay, last question, because I know that we're running over. What suggestions do you have for those with Lewy body dementia? I mean, I know that there are several different types of dementia out there. A place like Arden Courts, who specializes in dementia, actually knows the nuances between the diseases and how to particularly care for them. Maybe you two want to address, is there anything special that you would do for Lewy bodies?
A lot of forgiveness.
Yeah, you know, Lewy body dementia is one we often kind of see go, I don't want to say undiagnosed, misdiagnosed. You know, Lewy body really is an essentially Parkinson's related, has a lot of gait changes to the people's walk. So hallucinations are a part of that as well. And I think, Kelly, to your point, it's really important to ensure if you're seeking a residential environment, assisted living, a memory care, that it's someone who has an understanding, experience is preferred, but an understanding of the different types of dementia, because just like if you had 10 people that had Alzheimer's, all 10 of them would have different characteristics and symptoms, et cetera. When you add in different types of dementia, there's different approaches to care. And so it's important to understand that when you look at that person-centered care plan for each person. So I think just making sure you're finding the right resources. And I'll also add that I think a lot of times families say, my family doctor diagnosed us. Appreciate that. I think it's a great first step, but you need to get the advice of somebody else, because there are different types of dementia, different treatments, different medications impact different people. And there's a lot of nuances to it. It would be like somebody saying, well, you have cancer, and ending the conversation. What type of cancer and what's the treatment? So it's important you find out what type of dementia and get as specific as you can.
Well, I want to thank you two for joining us today and spending a little extra time answering the number of questions that we had in the chat room. I definitely learned a lot today. This recording will be posted in a few days on our website, which I posted several times, www.arden-courts.org/virtual-events. And we have other presentations on there as well. You can view any of them. They are all free and can be viewed at any time of day. But thank you, PK, for joining us today, and Brandon. I really appreciate all the knowledge that you shared with us today. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Until next time, stay well.
Thanks, PK.
Thank you, guys. I
Take care.
appreciate it.